Revolutionary Mothers by Carol Birkin, narrated and analyzed by Kaitlyn. Overview. We all know about the American Revolution, how the United States of America won its independence, but with the book Revolutionary Mothers by Carol Birkin, it highlights how women were a key factor in the American Revolution. It talks about prominent figures during the Revolution, but also lesser-known individuals. It goes into women's camp experiences, loyalists, African American women, daughters of liberty, and how women's lives were affected after the war. Women of the boycott. Women who didn't support what the Parliament released by the Tea Act of 1773 ended up boycotting the British. Around 51 women in North Carolina signed and agreed to boycott British-made goods, especially tea. Two figures who include Hannah Griffiths, who wrote poems towards women to make them join the boycott, but criticized men for not enforcing it. A second one is Anna Green Winslow, who states, "As I am a daughter of liberty, choose to was as much as our own manufacturer as possible," which means that we should not rely on British-made goods, but rely on our own Notable female figures. Notable female figures who aren't noticed as other prominent figures such as Abigail Adams and Martha Washington also played a very crucial role in the Revolution. First, I'll be talking about Grace Galloway, who was a wealthy loyalist married to Joseph Galloway, but when her husband left for the war, he left her all the property and the estate. He hoped that her presence would save her, but it got taken away by the townspeople as they disagreed of a woman having land and property. She tried to fight it back, but sadly, she failed. Another is Lydia Dargar, who was an American who housed British soldiers in her house and aided to them. She helped spy for the American side as she got important intel from the British and gave it to Washington through her son, as Washington greatly appreciated More notable female figures. More notable figures that we should all know that helped contribute is Mammy Kate, who was a slave, and when her master was held captive by a group of loyalists, she rescued him, and in reward her master, who later became governor, gave her a house and land for saving him. Another is Mary Jameson, who was born into a white family, but eventually got held captive in a Seneca raid, and when she was 15, she escaped with her two kids and went to live with two runaway slaves. Finally, a notable figure is Mercy Otis Warren, who wrote propaganda pieces supporting the Patriots, which shows how much support America had during this war, but not only for men, but women too. Prominent female figures in their camp experiences. More well-known figures that we know is Martha Washington and Abigail Adams. First, I'll start off with Martha Washington and her camp experiences. Martha was the wife of General George Washington, and on camp she was treated like a celebrity. She got all sorts of special treatment during her time that she visited the camps, but sadly her son, Jack, died of diseases, which was really a hard time for her and her family. Abigail Adams was very important as she wrote "Remember the Ladies" to her husband, John Adams. She wrote to let him know to remember America's women in the new government he was helping create, and wanted a revision of the laws for her new more prominent female figures and their camp experiences. These figures are not as prominent as the last two I mentioned in the last scene, but they are very important to people you may know today. First, we have Deborah Champion, who was a person who carried important documents to George Washington. She almost got caught by a redcoat, but acted like a helpless old lady, and they let her pass. She was able to get those documents to George Washington. Another is Magnus von Rysels, who witnessed the Battle of Freeman's Farm, as she quotes, "I pretend to be very courageous in order to dispel their fears. I was more dead than alive, though as not much as my own account of our own danger, for that which involved my husband." Finally, we have Kathy Green, who hated the war because she was separated from her husband the whole time, who was named Nathaniel. This shows how women who were on the campgrounds weren't able to see their husbands as much, which made them start to dislike the war. To it. Camp followers were women who followed the army during the war. They helped cook, clean, and take care of soldiers who got sick. But the one person who disagreed was George Washington. He hated camp followers. He really disliked it. He stated that he always wanted them to travel on the side streets or with the baggage in the rear, or if it was possible, to travel outside the city entirely. He also didn't want to be seen with his wife on the campgrounds too. Some problems that might have occurred with the camp followers is prostitution, and they also carried diseases. Women's roles outside the battlefield. Women who didn't go on the battlefield stayed at home and also kept up in keeping the households afloat and keeping them stable. They were considered helpmates, and helpmates were people who produced children, tended to the garden and the henhouse, welded muskets, and taking care of the shop. They were also required to master housework such as cleaning, dusting, polishing, which was very key into women's life after the war. Women's lives took a drastic change after the war. Overall, the book Revolutionary Mothers taught us how women played a big role during the American Revolution. In history now, we are taught about how men were a big part of it, such as George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and all those big named people, right? And also big name women who are Martha Washington and Abigail Adams. But also, we learned about lesser known people who actually played a big role, such as Lydia Dargard. She was literally a spy for the American side. She housed British soldiers and took them in and got British intel and gave them to George Washington, which helped them know where the British would be in their plans. Another is Deborah Champion. She played a big role as she pretended to be an old helpless woman when a redcoat almost caught her with intel. And she was able to give that intel to George Washington. She felt like she did a good deed. This shows how women, although were given the stereotype of working in the house and not being able to do things greater than a man, they were able to help with the war and were able to help America win, such as they were able to build muskets for the war and for soldiers to use. There were also important figures who took their husbands' spots at cannons to help shoot